and my name is Jack. And I was thinking about different generations and how different generations tend to perceive themselves. Recently, I had come across an article where someone was basically, was a millennial, basically was saying that their generation was supposed to be the ones to change things, change society, and that that all the kind of the fuck ups and everything that was wrong with society was done by the previous generations, right? The baby boomers, the Gen Xers, and so on. And that the millennials were going to be the ones to kind of correct everything and just kind of be like the revolutionary generation. And my initial reaction to that was kind of like, well, that's kind of arrogant, just to kind of immediately just dismiss everyone like that and just kind of put yourself on a pedestal and like, you're, fucking Superman or something like that. But then, I thought about it a little bit, and because I have friends from different generations and everything, so I have quite a few friends who are millennials and Gen Zers and stuff like that. And I, what came to mind really was how, honestly, every generation since the hippies from the 1960s has thought that every generation of like young people has perceived themselves as the game changers, the revolutionaries, the ones who are going to um, radically reformat society into something better and correct the errors of the previous institutions and generations before them. And there were some issues I guess I kind of had with that. First off, number one was that a lot of those errors tend to cross from generation to generation. So, for example, I come across another article where some millennials are wondering how come things hadn't changed. Where was this big revolution? Where was this huge change in society that was supposed to occur? Now that you had this up and coming generation that was used to transgenders and gay people and different interact with different races and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And how come these problems are still existent? Because it turns out that a large number of the people who are against progressive ideas like that are millennials, are Gen Zers, as well as people from older generations. It's not just, you know, people who are 40 and over. And I definitely understand that can be a very sobering realization, right? That was something that I think that the hippies from the 60s kind of dealt with after the Vietnam War, and when that closed out and they entered into the 70s and everything else was, suddenly they were becoming part of this. By the 80s, they had become part of the system that they resented, and like protested against. And arguably, that generation of the 1960s was the one that almost, if not did, live up to that motto of "we're the ones who are going to be the revolution, change society," because it was that generation that completely turned American and to a degree Western society on its head, so that traditional values and traditional institutions and everything were no longer seen in the same light and held as these untouchable, always correct divine doctrines and things, and suddenly, their flaws were exposed to everything, and it laid the groundwork for a lot of the liberal ideas and everything that we've experienced since then. Another point was that, having said that, each generation does add something to society at the same time. So, like in the 80s, because I'm a Gen Xer, in the 80s and 90s, it was, we were we were exposed for the first time to the whole idea of mass media, and just lots of material, lots of like materials to just buy shit, and everything. So it was like you had MTV, you had the CDs, movies and everything else like that. And our biggest problem really was, parents who either weren't always there because had to work all the time, or the divorce rate, and of course AIDS. Those were kind of our issues really. And then you have the millennials, of course, who basically ushered in the whole age of, and really kind of took in the internet and started introducing the internet as this kind of worldwide system, which Gen Zers then took to the next degree with YouTube and just selfies and posting videos from their cell phones onto and put them online, so that now no one could do anything without being taped by somebody and being exposed. There's like almost no security net for that. So each generation does add something to that, and to society, to the changes in history and stuff like that and whatever. And that's all well, and that's great. I think that's great and everything else. But at the same time, like I said earlier with the first point, it doesn't mean that they are infallible and that they're not going to make the same mistakes that the other generation did. A third problem I had with that was that this aspect that that for whatever reason, every generation since the 60s and especially since the 80s, this has always been kind of seen as slackers. So a lot of people look at millennials now as kind of these slackers, self-serving, want everything handed to them on platter, not have to work for it, kind of attitude and everything. And honestly, they were saying about that they were saying the same thing in the 80s as well, and I think the 60s to a degree also. That everyone was just a bunch of slack-jaw, lazy ass people, young people not wanting to work for a living and not appreciating kind of what they had. And that's a kind of a transcendent attitude, I think, that just kind of seems to be prevalent among people who are from other generations, and kind of compare their children and their grandchildren to their other their generation, like the greatest generation, the generation from World War II and the Depression, which almost nobody can say anything bad about, because they were in World War II, when they won one of the biggest events in history and paid such a huge cost for that and everything else. And yet they had their own issues too, that we have, and everything else. So and again, it isn't like they are immune to that, but like us and like millennials and Gen Zers, a lot of them have issues looking at that and saying, yeah, we kind of fucked up too in a lot of different ways. And ultimately, I kind of felt like that a lot of the problems that we have in our society today, do come from this human tendency that we have to group people into labels and into certain categories. And generations is a big one. And what that does is that once we put someone into a category just by looking at them and finding out what their age is or something like that, we automatically project onto them what their limitations are, how far they can go, how far they should go, what music can they listen to, how can they dress, things like that. And if they step outside of those bounds that in our own minds we have accepted and recognized, then there's something fucking wrong with these people. And we just proceed to judge them, and then vice versa happens the same way, and there is no sense of unity or anything like that. And I honestly feel like a lot of the positive changes that have happened in our society happened because people of different generations and different groups came together for a common cause, because everyone believed in that thing, whatever that cause was. And it was that unity there that really brought the changes that every generation has said they wanted to bring about. So anyways, if you have any questions or comments or criticisms below, feel free to comment, or you can email me at jackscontinuum@gmail.com. And again, my name is Jack, and I hope you have a wonderful day.